The words hit him like a branding iron pressed flat against his chest. "I am not a prize," she said, and her voice did not shake, not even a little, even though her hands were balled into fists at her sides and the firelight was catching the wet shine in her eyes that she absolutely refused to let spill over. "I am not something you win. I am not something you collect. I am not the thing at the end of a man's long road that he picks up and carries home to prove he made something of himself." Vance Garrett stood very still in the doorway of the lamplit barn, the Nevada desert wind pressing at his back, the smell of horses and hay and something older, something like regret, filling the space between them. His hat was in his hands. He had not even realized he had taken it off. He had rehearsed words. He had turned them over for 3 days on horseback, arranging and rearranging them the way a man organizes ammunition before a fight. He had planned to be calm, measured, to say exactly the right thing in the exact right order. But Nora Zealand was looking at him with those storm-colored eyes, and all of his carefully arranged words had scattered like spooked cattle. "Nora," he started. "Do not," she said quietly. "Do not say something smooth. Do not say something you practiced. I have been listening to smooth words from men who wanted something from me my entire life, and I am done with it." The lantern on the post behind her swayed on its hook, and her shadow moved with it, stretching long across the straw-littered floor, and Vance thought that it was the most honest moment he had ever stood inside of. Everything else in his life had been motion. Forward, always forward, away from one thing and toward nothing in particular. And then he had ridden into the town of Caldera, Nevada in the early spring of 1883, looking for work and expecting nothing, and everything had stopped, not slowed. Stopped. He looked at her for a long, raw moment. "No," he said finally, and his voice came out rougher than he intended, scraped down to something real by 3 weeks of not saying it out loud. "You are not a prize, Nora. You are the reason I stopped drifting." She stared at him. The lantern swayed. Outside, somewhere in the dark desert, a coyote called once and went silent. And this is where it had begun. 6 weeks earlier, the road into Caldera from the south was nothing but cracked red dirt, and the kind of silence that made a man feel like the sky was pressing down on him from above. Vance Garrett had been riding that kind of road for 4 years, which was not so different from the 4 years before that, except that back then he had been riding beside other men, and they had all been riding towards something specific that wore the shape of money and the uniform of obligation. He was 31 years old in the spring of 1883. He had been a cattle drover, then a ranch hand, then a drover again. He had worked a season for a surveying outfit up near the Utah border and another season hauling freight between Reno and Carson City. He had saved money carefully and spent it carelessly and saved it again. He had no wife, no land, no fixed point on any map that meant anything to him. He had simply kept moving because stopping had always felt like something was wrong with him. Caldera was a small cattle town, population just under 400, sitting in a wide basin between 2 low ridge lines where the land was brown and hard, and the spring grass came up thin but came up. There was a main street with a general store, a telegraph office, a saloon called the Red Elk, a livery, a doctor's office, a small church still being built at the far end of the road, and a land office. There was a jail that had also been used as a smokehouse before it was a jail, and still smelled like both things at once. Vance rode in on a Thursday. He had $16.40 in his pocket. His horse, a big dun gelding he called August for no particular reason, except that August had been the month he traded for him, was starting to show the travel in his knees. He stopped at the livery first because August came before everything, fed him, and paid for a night's stall with money he did not have much of, and then stood at the livery door looking up and down the main street of Caldera, and tried to remember what he usually did when he got to a new place. He usually found work. That was the ritual. He crossed the street toward the general store because general stores always knew who needed hands and who did not. The sign above the door read Zealand Dry Goods and General Supply, and the paint on the sign was the faded blue-green of old copper, and someone had repainted the letters recently in a slightly different shade. The store smelled like coffee and leather and the sharp, dry bite of sawdust. The woman behind the counter was counting something, her head bent over a ledger, and she did not look up when the bell above the door rang. She was perhaps 26, with dark brown hair pinned up in the no-nonsense way that suggested she pinned it up herself each morning with no particular patience for the process. And she was wearing a plain gray dress with the sleeves pushed up to the elbows, and an ink stain on her left wrist that she had clearly tried and failed to scrub off. She had a straight nose and a strong jaw and the kind of mouth that looked like it said exactly what it meant. Vance stood there a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "What do you need?" she asked, still not looking up. "Work," he said, "and some information if you have it." She looked up then, and her eyes were that stormy gray-brown that he would spend a great deal of time afterward thinking about. "I sell goods," she said, "not information. I meant, do you know who in this town is hiring?" She set her pencil down with the deliberate patience of someone who was used to being interrupted. "What kind of work?" "Cattle. Ranch work. I have been riding drives since I was 19, and I know how to do most things that need doing on a working spread." She studied him the way a person studies a document they are not sure they believe. "You just ride into towns and ask, generally." "How long have you been doing that?" He paused. "For years, give or take." Something shifted in her expression that he could not fully read. She picked her pencil back up and tapped it once against the ledger. "Harlan Beck over on the West Fork is looking for 2 or 3 men. He runs about 800 head and just lost his foreman to a busted leg that will not heal right. He is not the easiest man to work for." "I have worked for difficult men before. I imagine you have." She went back to her ledger. "The Beck Ranch is about 4 miles west of town. You will see the gate. It has got the brand burned into the crosspiece, a backward B." "Thank you," Vance said. "I did not do it for thanks," she said simply, without rudeness, the way someone states a fact about the weather. He bought a sack of dried beans and a paper of salt because he needed them, and because it seemed right to buy something if someone had helped him, and he went back out into the afternoon sun feeling, for the first time in a very long time, like he was standing somewhere specific rather than simply somewhere along the way. The Beck Ranch was exactly where she said it would be, and Harlan Beck was exactly as difficult as she implied. He was a heavy man in his late 50s with a temper like a badly coiled rope, unpredictable and likely to snap, and he ran his operation with the kind of stubborn efficiency that produced results but consumed the men around him like fuel. He hired Vance on the spot without much ceremony, offered him $30 a month and board in the bunkhouse, and told him to start in the morning. Vance started in the morning. The work was genuine and hard, and he was good at it, which was something he had always been able to rely on even when he could not rely on much else. He knew cattle the way some men know horses or machines or numbers, intuitively and completely, and Harlan Beck noticed within the first week and said nothing about it, which was as close to a compliment as the man apparently got. The bunkhouse had 6 other men in it. Vance learned their names and a little about each of them, in the way men learn things in close quarters, through the involuntary revelation of shared small spaces. There was a young man of 20 named Clay Denton who talked too much and was homesick for Missouri. There was an older hand named Ruiz who had come up from Sonora 15 years ago and said very little, but did everything right. There were 4 others who existed somewhere in between those 2 registers, decent men doing hard work and trying not to think too far ahead. Vance fit in because he was practiced at fitting in. He laughed when it was appropriate and worked hard and did not cause trouble and did not speak too much about himself, which was the formula he had refined over 4 years of moving from place to place. The first time he went back into Caldera for supplies, 8 days after he had arrived, he went to Zealand Dry Goods because that was where the ranch account was held. Harlan Beck had an arrangement with the store for supplies charged against the hand's wages. The woman at the counter was not the same woman. She was older, perhaps 60, with white hair and a brisk manner. She found the account without him having to explain it and filled his list without much conversation. He asked, on his way out, who had helped him the first time he came in. "My granddaughter," the old woman said, and her expression closed up slightly, not with hostility but with the particular caution of someone protecting something. "Nora." She knew right away who was hiring, he said. "Saved me a lot of riding around." The old woman's expression relaxed half a degree. "Nora knows everything about this town. She has made it her business to know." He nodded and left and thought about that briefly, and then put it away. He did not see Nora Zealand again for almost 2 weeks. This was not because he avoided the store, but because he did not go into town much, Harlan Beck having views about hands that spent too much time away from the work. When he did see her again, it was not at the store. It was at the well in the center of town, on a Sunday afternoon in late April when most of Caldera had gone to services at the half-built church, and the street was almost empty. She was working the pump handle with one arm and holding a full bucket in the other hand, and managing both tasks with the quiet competence of someone who had done this 10,000 times. A horse had come loose from the hitching post outside the Red Elk, probably while its owner was sleeping off a Saturday, and it was wandering in a bored and unhurried way directly toward the line of laundry. Someone had strung between the barber shop and the dry goods store. It was about to walk through 3 sheets and what looked like a man's good shirt. Nora saw it before Vance did, set the bucket down without spilling it, stepped into the street, and quietly turned the horse with nothing but the pressure of her hands and her body, guiding it back toward the hitching post as naturally as if she had planned to take a Sunday stroll with a horse. She retied the lead rope herself, tested the knot twice, and went back to her bucket. "You have done that before," Vance said. She did not startle. She had seen him coming, apparently. "My father ran cattle," she said, picking the bucket up. "You learn." "He still does. He died 3 years ago." She said it without performance, plainly, as a fact she had made her peace with. "My grandmother and I run the store now." "I am sorry," Vance said. "You did not cause it." She started toward the store. Then she paused and looked back at him, measuring something. "You are working for Harlan Beck." "Yes." "How is that going?" "Fine enough." She tilted her head slightly. "He works men hard and pays them fair and thinks that means he owes them nothing else. A lot of people find that wearing after a while." "I am used to it," Vance said. She studied him again with that same measuring quality, except this time he thought there might be something else in it too, something that was not quite concern and not quite curiosity and was somehow both. "Well," she said, "you know where the store is." He watched her carry the bucket across the street and through the door of Zealand Dry Goods, and he stood there for a moment in the empty Sunday street. And whatever had been loose and untethered in his chest for 4 years shifted, very slightly, like a compass needle finding something to point toward. He did not know yet that he was standing at the beginning of something. He did not know yet about Raymond Strand. Raymond Strand rode into Caldera on the 1st of May with 3 men behind him, and a letter of introduction from the Territorial Land Office in Carson City. And the letter said he was a land surveyor and developer with interest in properties in Mineral County. And the letter was partly true, which is the most dangerous kind of document. He was 43, well dressed in the way that costs money and is meant to announce that fact, with a pale, contained face and eyes that moved quickly over everything and catalogued what they saw. He was the kind of man who made a room feel smaller when he entered it. He went directly to the land office, and then he went to the Red Elk, and within 3 days everyone in Caldera knew Raymond Strand's name. What everyone knew was that he was buying up grazing land in the basin, making quiet offers to the smaller operations, and what some people suspected, but could not prove, was that the offers would not stay quiet or polite indefinitely. What almost no one knew, and Vance learned only because he overheard 2 men talking in low voices near the livery one evening, was that Raymond Strand had been involved in a land dispute 3 years ago in Elko County that had ended badly for the people on the losing side. A family had lost their property. A man had died. The details were vague in the way that details get vague when money and lawyers are involved. What Vance did not know yet was that the Zealand property, the store and the small parcel of land attached to it, was something Raymond Strand had been looking at for longer than his arrival in Caldera suggested. He found this out on a Wednesday afternoon in early May when he came into the store for a paper of tobacco for one of the older Beck hands who had asked him to pick it up. And Nora was behind the counter, and she looked like someone who had recently held herself together through something significant and was still in the process of making sure all the pieces were back in the right places. She served him without mentioning it. He paid for the tobacco and hesitated at the door. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up from the counter with an expression that very clearly said she was not accustomed to being asked that question. "I am fine," she said. "I do not think that is true," he said quietly, not with challenge but with the plain observation of someone who was paying attention. A pause. She set down the things she had been organizing. "A man came in this morning," she said. "He wants to buy this building." He made what he called a generous offer, and then he described in some detail what would happen to the value of surrounding properties if certain improvements were made to the ones he was purchasing. "Raymond Strand," Vance said, her eyes narrowed slightly. "You know him." "I know of him." "A little." He chose his words with care. "What did you say to him?" "I told him the store was not for sale." "What did he say?" Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "He said he was sure I would think about it." Vance stood there for a moment with the tobacco paper in his hand, and something forming in his chest that was not yet a plan but was the shape of one. The feeling that something had to be done even before knowing what. "If he comes back," Vance said carefully, "and he will come back, you do not have to answer him alone." She looked at him with that direct, measuring look again. "I have been answering things alone for 3 years," she said. "I am capable of it." "I know you are," he said. "I am not suggesting otherwise." She held his gaze for a moment, as if checking for the thing she was afraid might be hiding behind the words. She did not find it, apparently, because something in her expression eased, very slightly, like a door opening an inch. "I appreciate the concern," she said finally. He nodded and left. He spent the ride back to the ranch turning over the information about Raymond Strand the same way he had turned over ammunition in his mind before, checking the weight of each piece. Strand was not a man to be handled with confrontation, at least not the kind that announced itself. He was a man who worked through pressure, slow and incremental, the way water works through stone. The thing that Vance was beginning to feel in his chest, the thing that had been pointing like a compass needle since that Sunday morning at the well, was not simply concern for a woman running a store by herself. It was older and stronger than that, and he was honest enough with himself, alone on the road in the evening, to acknowledge it. He was falling in love with Nora Zealand. He had been falling since the moment she looked up from her ledger with her ink-stained wrist and her matter-of-fact eyes, and told him exactly who was hiring without making a performance out of knowing it. He had been falling and choosing not to look down, the way a man on a horse sometimes chooses not to look at the ravine. He was going to have to look at it eventually. Over the next 2 weeks, he found reasons to come into town more often than Harlan Beck would have strictly approved of. He told himself it was for supplies or information or business of various sorts. He brought small things when he came, not as gifts exactly, because he sensed that gifts would be received with suspicion, but as incidental offerings. Once a newspaper from Reno that he had finished reading that had a story about cattle markets in the Great Basin that he thought might be useful to someone running a business. Once a small problem with the account he said he needed to sort out in person, which was only marginally manufactured. Nora's grandmother, whose name was Elsa Zealand, was a small, sharp woman with white hair and a direct manner that reminded Vance of the way Nora's manner would look in 30 years, and she seemed to find Vance's increasingly frequent appearances at the counter mildly amusing. He and Nora talked. Not about the obvious things. About the town, the weather, the price of beef, the quality of the spring grass, the news from Carson City, the state of the road south, the particular habits of the group of cattle that kept finding a way out of the north pasture at Beck Ranch no matter what was done to shore up the fence. Small things. Real things. He learned that she had grown up in Caldera, that her father had come west from Ohio in 1862 with her mother, who had died when Nora was 11, and had built the store from nothing, and that she had worked in it since she was old enough to carry a box. That she had taught herself bookkeeping from a copy of a merchant's accounting manual she had ordered from San Francisco. That she had never been east of Reno and had strong opinions about books, having read everything she could order through the mail or borrow from the 3 other families in Caldera who owned books. She learned things about him, too, in the way these conversations always work, through the exchange of information that seems casual and is not. She learned that he had grown up in Texas near Waco, and that his father had been a drover and his mother had died of fever when he was 7. That he had taken his first real job at 17 on a cattle outfit headed up toward Kansas, and had not really stopped working cattle since. That he had no particular reason for 4 years of constant motion, except that staying in one place had required a reason he had not yet found. He did not say that last part out loud. He thought it where she could not hear. She did not ask why he was still coming into town so often. He did not explain it. They both understood, he thought, that they were in the early stages of something that neither of them was naming yet, and naming it too soon would be like picking up a plant before the roots had settled. What disrupted the careful, unhurried growth of this thing was Raymond Strand. Strand came back to the store on the 15th of May, on a morning when Vance happened to be in town returning a piece of equipment to the blacksmith. And through the window of the store, Vance saw the conversation and could not hear it but could read it in Nora's posture, and the way she stood behind the counter, and the deliberate stillness of her face. He did not go in. She had told him she was capable of answering things alone, and she was right, and he believed her. But afterward, when Strand and his 2 men came out of the store and moved down the street toward the saloon, Vance went in. Nora was writing in the ledger with more force than the ledger required. He came back, Vance said. He came back, she confirmed without looking up. What did he say this time? She set the pencil down. He reduced his offer and said the reduction was because of market conditions. He explained the market conditions in detail. He also mentioned that he has secured the water rights on the North Fork Creek from the land office. She paused. The North Fork Creek is where my father's small grazing parcel pulls water from, the parcel we let out to 2 small families for grazing. Vance was quiet for a moment, understanding what this meant. He is trying to squeeze you out, he said. That is what it looks like, she said steadily. Yes. Can you contest the water rights at the land office? I can try. She finally looked up, and her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them that was fighting very hard to stay behind them. I do not have money for a lawyer. My grandmother and I are comfortable but not comfortable enough for a fight of that kind. And the land office in Carson City is 6 hours away. I know someone who might help with the legal part, Vance said, and he was thinking of a man he had worked with 3 years ago on a survey crew, a man named Patterson who had subsequently studied law and was practicing now in Reno. Not a guarantee, but a possibility. She looked at him for a long moment. Why are you doing this? She asked. The question was direct, not suspicious, but honest in the way she was honest about everything. He held her gaze. He had the answer to this question. He had been carrying it for 2 weeks, but he was not yet sure she was ready to receive it, and he was not yet sure he was ready to offer it, so he said the part that was true and left the rest. Because it is wrong, he said, and because I am standing here and I can help. She nodded slowly. She did not push the rest of it. Thank you, she said, and meant it. He wrote a letter to Patterson in Reno that evening from the general delivery at the telegraph office, and he paid for it with money that he was saving for no particular purpose, which felt like the most purposeful thing he had done with money in recent memory. Patterson wrote back within the week. He could not make the trip to Caldera, but he outlined the process for challenging a water rights claim, and specified which documents were needed and explained that the claim Strand had filed had a narrow procedural window within which it could be contested. He also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that he had heard of Strand, and that the man had done this before, and that the previous cases had ended in his favor not because his claims were sound but because the people opposing him had run out of money before the process ran out of time. Vance brought the letter to Nora. She read it carefully, twice. Her grandmother read it over her shoulder. We can file the challenge, Nora said when she was done. I can write the documents. I know how to write a legal document. I have done it before for my father's property filings. She was already thinking ahead, organizing the way she organized everything. But I will need to travel to Carson City to file in person within the window. I can take you, Vance said. She looked at him. I can drive the wagon, he said. Or we can ride, it is faster. I know that road. Harlan Beck will not give you that time, she said. He might, Vance said, if I explain the situation. He was not sure Beck would. He explained the situation to Beck that evening, and Beck was quiet for a long moment, and then said that Vance could take 3 days if the north fence was finished first. And the north fence took 2 days of long work in the sun, and Vance finished it with Ruiz and Clay helping. They left for Carson City on a Thursday morning before sunrise, Nora and Elsa in the wagon and Vance riding August alongside. And the road south through the basin was pink and gold with the earliest light coming up behind the eastern ridge. The drive took most of the day, and they arrived in Carson City in the late afternoon, and found a rooming house, and Nora and Elsa took a room, and Vance took a room at the far end of the hall, which was proper, and nobody mentioned that the arrangement was proper because proper things do not need announcing. They filed the documents the next morning at the land office. The clerk reviewed them carefully. Nora had written them exactly right, the legal language precise, and the procedural requirements met to the letter. The clerk said the challenge would be reviewed within 60 days. 60 days, Nora said on the way out of the building, and she sounded like she was calculating something. It is within the window, Vance said. I know. She was quiet for a moment on the steps of the land office in the Carson City morning, and then she said, so quietly he almost missed it, thank you for this. He almost said something then. He almost said the thing he had been carrying since the first day he walked into her store. But Elsa was 3 steps ahead of them on the sidewalk, and the moment was not right, or he was not brave enough, which he chose not to examine too closely. The drive back to Caldera on Saturday was slower because they stopped at noon and ate a cold lunch at a creek where the willows were coming out green, and the water was clear over flat stones. And Elsa fell asleep against a bundled blanket in the back of the wagon almost immediately after eating, which Vance suspected was not entirely accidental on her part. He and Nora sat near the creek in the spring afternoon and talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with Raymond Strand or land offices or water rights, and everything to do with who they were. She told him about learning to read from her mother before her mother died, and about the way her father had kept her mother's books on a shelf in the store, even though he could not read most of them, just because she had loved them. She told him about the winter 2 years after her father died, when the store's income had dropped so low she had seriously considered selling to the first offer she received, and how she had stayed up one night with the ledgers until she found a way to restructure the supply accounts that saved enough to keep going, and how she had felt when she closed the ledger that night, not relieved, but something stronger than that, the feeling of having held something together that mattered. He told her about the cattle drive when he was 23 that had gone wrong in a blizzard in Wyoming, and the men who had been lost, and the particular way that loss had settled in him, and the way motion had felt afterward like the only honest response to a world that could simply take things away without warning. Like if you kept moving it could not catch you, she said. Something like that, he said. Yes, she looked at the creek for a moment. And now you have been in Caldera for 6 weeks and are still here. He looked at her. What changed? She asked, and she asked it genuinely without pressure. He took a long breath. The creek moved. A bird called somewhere in the willows. Elsa snored very softly from the back of the wagon. I am not sure I can say it clearly yet, he said, but something stopped making sense the way it used to. She nodded slowly, as though she had expected something like this, and did not push it further, and they rode back to Caldera in the long gold afternoon, and he thought that she was the most fully realized human being he had ever met, and that he was in very serious trouble. Back in Caldera, Raymond Strand noticed the trip. He noticed it because small towns notice everything and information travels without effort, and Strand was a man who paid for information. What he concluded from it, or what he chose to conclude, was that the Zealand woman had found herself a man to hide behind, which meant she was more frightened than she was pretending to be, which meant she was weakening. He had done this enough times to know the signs. He went to see Harlan Beck. This was the thing Vance did not know until after it happened. Strand went to Beck, and he made a case to Beck about the Zealand parcel and how the land dispute around it might affect neighboring properties and leases, which was not entirely fictional, and he made a side comment about Beck's hired hands spending time on personal business that had nothing to do with cattle. Beck was a man who did not like being told things indirectly. He was also a man who did not like his hands having obligations outside of his operation. Vance was in the bunkhouse on a Tuesday evening when Beck came in and told him that his services were no longer needed after the end of the week. Vance sat with this information for a moment. "Did Strand speak to you?" he asked. Beck's face did not change. I run my operation based on what my operation needs. End of the week. He was not going to confirm it. He did not need to. Vance thought about being angry. He explored the inside of the feeling and found that underneath the anger was something else, something clean and clarifying, the sense that the invisible wall he had always kept between himself and any particular place was no longer actually there. He was not angry about losing the job. He was angry that Strand had reached into his life and done this. He was angry on Nora's behalf. He was angry with a sharp, specific feeling that knew its target and its reasons. He spent the last of his days at Beck Ranch finishing his work as carefully as he always finished things. And on his last day, he settled his account with Clay and Ruiz and the others in the bunkhouse with the handshakes of men who have worked well together and did not resent each other for what they could not control. He rode into Caldera on a Saturday morning with his bedroll behind his saddle and $16 left after settling the livery bill, and he went to the store. It was early and only Nora was behind the counter, Elsa still upstairs. She looked up when he came in and read something in his face. "What happened?" she asked immediately. He told her. She was still for a moment. Then something came into her expression that was complex and layered, guilt among the layers and anger and something else that she pushed down before it could become visible. "Strand did this," she said. Not a question. "Almost certainly. Because of me," she said. "Because you helped me." "Because he is the kind of man who does this kind of thing," Vance said firmly. "It is not your doing." She looked at him for a long, careful moment. What will you do? He had thought about this. He had an answer. "I would like to stay in Caldera for a while if I can find work. I am asking around." The look on her face did something complicated. "Why?" she said, and the question meant more than it said. "I told you," he said. "Something stopped making sense the way it used to." She did not say anything for a moment. She looked down at the counter, then up at him. "There is some work I need doing here," she said carefully. "In the store and the back room, heavy things and repairs. I cannot pay much." "I am not asking for much," he said. He worked for Nora and Elsa for the next 2 weeks, fixing and lifting and sorting and organizing, doing the structural work the store had needed for months that 2 women running a business alone had no time to address. He repaired a shelf that had been bowing under weight. He fixed the back door that had swollen in its frame and would not close properly. He re-roofed a section of the back room where rain had been coming through. He learned the rhythm of the store and the town and the particular way that Nora moved through her days, efficient and purposeful, and with a quality of attention he had never encountered in anyone else. The way she focused on whatever was in front of her, as if it were the only thing in the world. He also did something else. He spent his evenings in the back of the Red Elk, not drinking heavily but listening, because in saloons men talked freely about things they guarded in daylight, and he was gathering information about Strand. What he gathered was this. Strand was planning to make a formal offer to purchase the land office parcels adjacent to the North Fork Creek water rights he had filed. If those offers went through, the pressure on the Zealand parcel would increase significantly. He was moving faster than they had 60-day review window suggested. He had done this before, not just in Elko County but in 2 other counties in Nevada Territory. And in each case the people he had targeted had either sold or simply abandoned their claims when the financial pressure became unbearable. He also learned, from a drunk surveyor who had done work for Strand earlier in the year, that the backing behind Strand's operation was not just Strand himself. There was a larger land development company out of San Francisco with interests in Nevada Territory, and Strand was their instrument. This was not illegal exactly, but it meant the resources behind him were considerably larger than what a single man in a good suit suggested. Vance brought all of this to Nora on a Thursday evening after the store closed. He spread what he knew across the counter, organized and clear, because she deserved to know all of it, not the edited version men sometimes offered women when they thought the full picture would be too alarming. She listened without interrupting. She asked 2 precise questions. Then she was quiet for a long moment. "The 60-day review is in 3 weeks," she said. "If it goes in our favor, the water rights question is resolved. If it does not, or if it takes longer, we are in a more difficult position." "Yes," Vance said. "And the Patterson letter says these cases tend to be decided based on who can maintain financial pressure the longest." "Yes." She looked at the counter. She was running numbers in her head. He could see it. "My grandmother has some savings. I have the store inventory. If we can operate for 3 months without the income from the grazing parcel leases, and if the challenge succeeds, we can hold." 3 months is a long time," he said carefully. "I know what 3 months is," she said without sharpness, just truth. He nodded. "I have some money I can offer." "Not much, but I can offer it." She looked at him then, and the look was different from the way she usually looked at him. It had something in it that he did not quite have a word for, something that was near the edge of the thing neither of them had named yet. "Vance," she said quietly. "It is not charity," he said before she could. "And it is not a transaction. I know you are not someone who accepts things easily. I am not offering it that way." "Then what way are you offering it?" He held her gaze. The lamp behind the counter was burning low, and the evening light through the front window was the faded orange of a Nevada sunset. And there were no other sounds except the distant noise of the saloon down the street and the occasional horse on the road outside. "As someone who wants this to work out," he said, "for you." The silence was different from the other silences they had occupied. This one had weight and texture. "Why?" she said, and she asked it the same way she had asked it before, except this time she held his eyes when she said it. He had been arranging the words for this, the same way he had arranged words for other things, and none of the arrangements had been right, and he had thrown them all away. And now he had nothing prepared, and he thought that was probably as it should be. "Because in 6 weeks in this town," he said, "I have felt more like myself than I have in 4 years, and when I try to find where that is coming from, it leads to you. Every time." She did not look away. The color in her cheeks changed very slightly. "I am going to be careful with that," she said finally, and her voice was quieter than usual. "Not because I do not believe you, but because I have had to be very careful with everything for a long time." "I know," he said. "I am not asking you to stop being careful." She nodded slowly. "Then thank you," she said, "for the offer, and for the rest of it." He walked back to his room at the boarding house where he was staying and lay in the dark for a long time, looking up at the ceiling, and felt something settle in him that had not been settled in a very long time. 3 weeks later, the land office sent their preliminary response to the challenge. It was not a final ruling. It was a request for additional documentation regarding the original establishment of the Zealand parcel's water use, specifically records predating the current filing period that demonstrated consistent prior use of the North Fork Creek by the Zealand property. Nora read the letter and went very still. "You have those records?" Vance asked. "My father might have kept them," she said. "He kept everything." She was already moving toward the back storage room where the store's old records were kept in wooden crates stacked along the wall. They spent the next 4 hours going through those crates together. It was close and dusty work, and the crates were not organized with any logic that Vance could find. But Nora seemed to know her father's mind well enough to have a theory about where things might be, and most of the time she was right. They found the records. They were in a battered tin box inside the third crate from the bottom. Letters and receipts, and a hand-drawn property map from 1864 that clearly showed the water access lines from the North Fork to the Zealand parcel, predating Strand's claim by nearly 20 years. Nora sat back on her heels with the tin box in her lap and held the papers, and her face did the thing again. The thing where the inside of it was more visible than she intended. "He kept all of this," she said, half to herself. Vance sat back against the wall of the storage room and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would be better than saying nothing. She cleared her throat, carefully put the papers in order, stood up businesslike. "I will copy these and send the copies to Carson City," she said. "I will keep the originals here." "Good," he said. She looked at him with the papers in her hands and the lamplight on her face in the dusty storage room, and he thought that she was the most extraordinary person he had ever known. And he thought it was very inconvenient that this was also the precise moment when Raymond Strand walked into the store at the front. They heard him before they saw him, the bell above the door, and then his voice calling for the Zealand woman, and they came out of the storage room, and Nora straightened and put the documents on the shelf behind the counter, and Vance stood slightly to one side, not in front of her, because she did not need someone in front of her, but present. Strand looked at Vance with the calm assessment of a man who has dealt with obstacles before. He looked at Nora with something that was almost respectful but had calculation underneath it. "I have a revised offer," he said to Nora. He set a paper on the counter. "Considerably more than before. Given recent events, I think you will find it generous." Nora did not pick the paper up. "I told you the store was not for sale." "The parcel," he said smoothly. "Not the store. The grazing parcel and the associated water access. You would retain the store and this building." Nora was quiet for a moment. Vance could see her thinking, running the implications. "Without the parcel income and the water access," she said, "the two families leasing the grazing land would have nowhere to go." "Those are private leasing arrangements," Strand said carefully. "Not your permanent obligation." "They are families," Nora said. "The Morales family has been on that parcel for 6 years. They have children." Strand's expression did not change. "I am making a business offer, Miss Zealand. I am not unsympathetic to personal considerations, but business is business." "Then my business answer is no," she said. "And my personal answer is also no." Strand was quiet for a moment. He picked the paper back up slowly, folding it without hurry. He looked at Vance with the appraising look again. "You are Garrett," he said. "You used to work for Beck." "That is right," Vance said. "I understand you are no longer employed there." "I am employed here," Vance said, and let it sit at that. Strand nodded very slightly. "I see." He tucked the paper into his coat. "I will leave the offer open," he said to Nora, "in case circumstances change." He said it without threat in his voice, which was somehow worse than if there had been threat. He left. Nora let out a breath that she had apparently been holding without knowing it. She looked at Vance. "He knew you lost the job at Beck," she said. "He knew it because of him." "Yes," Vance said. She picked up the documents from the shelf and held them. "I am sorry. I keep saying that and it does not seem like enough." "Stop apologizing for him," Vance said firmly. "He is responsible for what he does." "Not you," she nodded. But her eyes were still troubled. They sent the documents to Carson City the next morning, and then they waited. Waiting was the hardest part, and Nora filled it the way she filled most things, with work. She was at the counter before the sun was fully up, and she was still doing accounts after it went down. Vance was there most of those hours, working and being present, and in the spaces between work they talked. And in those conversations the thing between them grew until it was impossible for either of them to claim they did not feel it. She laughed at something he said one morning, and he thought it was the best sound he had ever heard in his life, and he must have had something on his face because she stopped laughing and looked at him with awareness, and they both looked away at the same time and did not mention it. He brought her coffee from the Red Elk on a morning when she had forgotten to make her own, and she thanked him and their hands touched when she took the cup, and neither of them mentioned that either. Elsa watched all of this with the contained satisfaction of someone observing a process she had been expecting to play out, and was pleased to see progressing as expected. On a Thursday evening, about 2 weeks after the documents had been sent, Nora and Vance were in the store after closing, him fixing the last of the broken shelf brackets, her balancing the day's accounts, when she set her pencil down and said, without preamble, "Tell me something true." He looked up from the shelf. "Something you have not told anyone," she said, "or at least not often." He sat back and thought about this seriously because she deserved a serious answer. "I was scared for most of the last 4 years," he said. "Not of any particular thing, just of stopping. Because I thought that if I stopped and looked at what my life was, I would find out it was nothing, that all the motion was just motion and there was nothing underneath it." She was very still across the counter. "And," she said quietly, "and then I came here," he said, "and I stopped. And when I looked, it was not nothing. It was the beginning of something." He held her gaze, which is both better and more terrifying than the alternative. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp between them burned steadily. "My turn," she said. "Something true." She straightened a paper on the counter without looking at it. "I have been managing everything by myself for 3 years because I did not trust that anyone could help without wanting something for it. And I do not mean money. I mean control or credit or the feeling of having rescued something." She looked up. "You have not done that. You have helped and then stood back. And that is the first time that has happened, and I did not know what to do with it at first, which is probably obvious." "It was not obvious," he said. "Vance," she said, with a tone of quiet amusement and something warmer beneath it, "it was a little obvious." He found himself almost smiling. "All right," he conceded. "Maybe a little." She looked at him steadily. "I am not going to say everything that I am thinking," she said. "Not yet. But I want you to know that I am thinking it." "That is enough," he said. "For now, that is more than enough." The ruling from the land office came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after that Thursday evening, in a sealed envelope carried by the weekly mail rider, and Nora opened it at the counter in the morning light with Elsa standing at her shoulder and Vance loading supplies in the back room. She read it twice, then she put it down. Then she said very quietly, "Elsa." He came out of the back room when he heard her voice, because something in the single word told him what kind of moment it was. Elsa was holding Nora's arm, and they were both looking at the paper on the counter, and Nora's face had done the thing again, except this time she let it, and her eyes were bright with something that was not sadness. "The challenge was upheld," she said when she saw him. "The prior use records were sufficient. Strand's water rights claim is denied." He let out a breath he had been holding for weeks. "He can contest it," she said, still reading. "But the window for contesting is narrow, and the cost of contesting a denied claim in this territory is considerable, and the land office notes that the documentation is strong." "He will not contest it," Vance said. "Not if it costs more than it is worth. He will move to somewhere easier." She nodded. Her eyes were still bright. "He will move to somewhere easier," she repeated, and the relief in her voice was real and enormous, and she did not try to minimize it. Elsa patted her arm and said something in German that Vance did not understand but read from the tone as something like, "This is what holding on looks like." And then Elsa said she was going upstairs to put a kettle on for coffee, because they were celebrating, and she disappeared through the back. Nora and Vance were alone at the counter with the ruling paper between them. She looked at him. Her eyes were still doing the thing. "We did this," she said. "You did this," he said. "You wrote the documents, you kept the records, you told him no every time." She shook her head slightly. "We." He nodded slowly. "We," he agreed. And then something in the air between them shifted in the same way the compass needle had shifted that first Sunday at the well, except more finally, more completely. And he took one step around the counter, and she did not move away, and he was close enough to see the exact color of those storm-gray eyes, and she tilted her head up slightly, and neither of them spoke. He touched her face, the lightest touch he had in him, with one hand along her jaw. "Nora," he said. "I know," she said very quietly. And he kissed her, gently and carefully, the way he did everything that mattered. And she kissed him back with the directness she brought to everything she did. And the morning light came through the window of Zealand Dry Goods and General Supply in the spring of 1883, and landed on both of them like a benediction. The day after that, Strand rode out of Caldera with his 3 men and his land company backing and his plans. And the word went around the town quickly in the way all significant departures do. And the people who had been worried about what Strand was doing breathed the collective breath of a community released from something they had not been talking about openly, but had all felt. The Morales family sent a basket of bread and dried chilies to the store, which made Elsa tear up and Nora smile with her whole face. Vance wrote a letter to Patterson in Reno thanking him for his help, and Patterson wrote back 3 weeks later saying he was glad it had worked out and also asking if Vance was planning to stay in Caldera, because apparently even a man in Reno could tell that something had changed in the direction of Vance's life. Vance wrote back that he was. He found other work in Caldera in the weeks that followed, work that suited him. There was a cattle operation at the edge of the basin run by a quiet man named Alderman who was not like Harlan Beck, and who needed an experienced hand 2 or 3 days a week. There was the town's small cooperative grazing association that needed someone with cattle expertise to help manage the collective herd in the north pasture. There was work of various kinds, and he did it, and on the other days he was at the store. He and Nora moved through the summer like 2 people finding the specific frequency of each other's presence. The way that works when it is right, not by diminishing one person into the other's shape, but by discovering the places where 2 separate shapes fit together naturally, without either having to change. She argued with him. He liked it. She had opinions about everything and stated them directly and expected to be argued with in kind. And when he disagreed with her, she listened to the disagreement and either changed her view or explained clearly why she was not changing it. And this was the most satisfying form of conversation he had ever encountered. He made her laugh at least once a day. This became something he worked at, quietly and without announcing it as a project, because her laugh was the particular version of a thing that makes the world make more sense while it is happening. She trusted him slowly and completely. This was not a contradiction. She extended trust the way good stone is laid, each piece seated carefully and checked before the next went in, so that the whole structure when it was done was solid without seams. In August, he told her the rest of what he had meant to say back in the spring, in the full and unabbreviated version. He did it on a Sunday evening when the store was closed, and they were sitting on the back steps of the building in the summer dark, and the sky over the Nevada desert was doing the thing it does in August, enormous and deep and full of stars. "I think I loved you from the first week," he said. "I have been aware of it longer than I have been saying it." She was quiet for a moment. The crickets were loud in the dark. "I know," she said. "I think I loved you from the second week. The first week I was mostly suspicious." He looked at her. What changed in the second week? You brought the newspaper, she said. The one with the cattle market article. You brought it because you thought it would be useful to someone running a business. You did not bring it to impress me. You brought it because it was useful. She looked at the stars. Men who bring things because they are useful instead of because they want to be impressive are rare. He thought about this. That seems like a low threshold. It is not low, she said firmly. It is simply accurate. He reached over and took her hand, and she let him, and they sat in the August dark with the stars out and the desert smelling of heat and distance and something green that came up at night, and he thought that this was the thing underneath the motion. This specific, undramatic, enormous thing. He asked her to marry him in October. He did not make a large event of it. He thought about doing so and decided she would not prefer it, and he was right. He asked her on a Tuesday afternoon in the store when Elsa was out, and the light was coming through the window the way it did in October, golden and already angled toward winter. He asked her directly, without a prepared speech, because he had learned from the barn moment that prepared speeches were not what she wanted from him. "Nora," he said, "I want to marry you if you want to marry me." She set down what she was holding. She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes in the October light. "Yes," she said, without hesitation, without conditions. Just yes. He felt the word land somewhere in the center of his chest and settle there like something that had been looking for exactly that place. Elsa, when they told her, said finally in German, and then said it again in English in case there had been any ambiguity. They were married in December, in the church that was by then fully built, on a day that was cold and clear with the kind of Nevada winter sky that looks like clean glass from one end to the other. The ceremony was small by design and large by attendance, because Caldera was 400 people, and 400 people do not miss a wedding if they have any say in it. Ruiz came from Beck Ranch and shook Vance's hand for a very long time without speaking. Clay Denton came and cried openly, which he explained was because of the cold air, which nobody believed. The Morales family came and brought their children, and the youngest one, a girl of 3, fell asleep on Elsa's shoulder during the ceremony. Nora wore a dress she and Elsa had made together over 2 weeks in November, a deep blue wool that turned her eyes the particular color of a winter storm. And she carried a small bunch of dried flowers from the summer because real flowers were not available in December in Nevada. And she had said that was fine, that she preferred things honest to things performed. She was the most beautiful thing Vance had ever seen. He told her so in the plainest words he had, and she looked at him and said, "You do not have to say that." And he said, "I know that, which is why it is true." And she made a very small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite something else. The church was warm with gathered bodies and candles, and the particular warmth of a community celebrating something that feels right. The pastor was a young man named Hobbs who was too nervous to eat the morning of the ceremony, but delivered it beautifully anyway. There was food afterward at the Red Elk, which had been cleared of its usual furniture for the occasion, and there was dancing of the informal and enthusiastic sort, and Elsa danced with Ruiz for a long time while pretending not to be enjoying herself. Vance danced with Nora twice, and then they stood at the edge of the room together watching the people they had come to know in this town, and he had his hand at the small of her back, and she leaned very slightly into his side. And it was the kind of moment that does not announce itself as significant while it is happening, and is only recognized afterward as the hinge point everything else turns on. They lived above the store, in the apartment that had always been Nora and Elsa's, which was 3 rooms and a kitchen and a view of the main street and the ridge line behind the town. Elsa moved her things to the back room and said she preferred it because it was quieter, which was possibly true and was also possibly generous, and no one examined the question too closely. The apartment was full of Nora's books and her grandmother's quilts and the smell of the store below them, coffee and leather and dry goods, and Vance added his things gradually. The few things he had accumulated and kept through 4 years of motion, and they settled into each other's space with the natural ease that happens when two people are genuinely compatible in the way that is about character rather than simply desire. In the spring of 1884, Nora told him she was expecting a child. She told him on a morning in March, early, before the store opened, sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee, and she said it directly and then watched his face. He sat down. He looked at her. He had not known, until this exact moment, how much he had wanted this, because for 4 years he had been a man with no fixed place and no fixed future, and wanting particular things had seemed like something he was not qualified to do. His eyes stung. He was surprised by this. "Are you all right?" she asked, reading him. "I am very much more than all right," he said, and his voice came out rough and he did not try to smooth it. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over and held it. Elsa wept when they told her. Happy tears, the sort that come out of somewhere deep that is not sadness at all. She went to the church 3 times that week, which was 2 more times than her usual schedule, apparently to express gratitude in person. Nora was practical about the pregnancy in the way she was practical about everything, which was that she researched what she needed to know, consulted with the doctor in town, a quiet man named Hartley who was skilled and unpretentious, and went about her daily work without treating the pregnancy as an occasion for fragility. Vance watched her with the careful attention of a man who knows better than to hover but cannot entirely help himself, and she told him twice that she was fine, and once that she was going to put a bell on him if he kept appearing every time she moved a box. He stopped hovering and contented himself with being present, which she did not object to. Their son was born in November of 1884, on a cold and windless night when the desert was perfectly still outside the window, and he arrived with the considerable opinions and strong lungs that suggested he had inherited both of his parents' directness. The doctor said he was healthy. Elsa said he looked like Nora's father around the eyes. Nora said he looked like a person who had decided something important and was committed to it. They named him Thomas. Thomas Garrett. After Nora's father, who had kept every record and every book and every piece of evidence that had made it possible for her to stay. Vance held his son on the first night, in the lamplight in the bedroom above the store, and Thomas looked up at him with the unfocused and profound attention of a new person encountering the world for the first time. And Vance thought about the road into Caldera, the cracked red dirt and the pressing sky and the $16 in his pocket, and the absolute conviction that he was just passing through. He had stopped, not because he had given up motion or because he had been captured by obligation, but because he had found the thing that motion was always, at its truest, a way of searching for. This room. This woman asleep in the bed behind him, her dark hair loose on the pillow, exhausted and magnificent. This child. This specific life in this specific place. He pressed his lips very gently to the top of his son's head and felt the warmth and weight of him and held on. The years in Caldera after Thomas were full in the way that good years are full, not with the absence of difficulty, but with the presence of meaning that makes difficulty navigable. The store grew steadily under Nora's management, as she expanded the supply arrangements and began providing goods to 2 smaller communities up in the Ridge country that had no store of their own, sending a wagon out twice a month. She brought on a young woman named Clara to help at the counter, and Clara was capable and learned quickly and freed Nora to manage the business at a level that suited her mind, which liked problems and solutions, and the satisfaction of systems that worked. Vance formalized his arrangement with the Cooperative Grazing Association and eventually took a formal managing role in it, which brought a reliable income and used his expertise in ways that felt both useful and honest. He was good at what he did, and he knew it without needing anyone to tell him, though the men he worked with told him anyway in the particular nonverbal way of people who respect someone's competence, the kind of quiet authority that comes from always knowing what to do with a difficult animal or a complicated terrain. He built a desk for their apartment from timber he selected and joined himself, because Nora had mentioned once that she needed a proper place to keep the store's accounts upstairs, and the kitchen table was getting crowded. And he spent 3 weeks building the desk in the evenings, and it came out well, solid and properly proportioned. And she ran her hands over the surface when he brought it up the stairs and said it was beautiful. He built other things too over the years. A proper chicken coop behind the building, which Elsa managed with the thoroughness she brought to everything. A small addition to the back storage room. A proper stable for August, and for the 2 horses Nora kept, who were named with the same practical non-sentimentality she brought to most naming, simply Brown and the Gray. They saw Elsa every day. The store was below them. The distance was measured in steps. Thomas grew into a boy who was curious and verbal, and who had his mother's directness and his father's patience, and the combination produced a child who was very easy to love and occasionally very challenging to argue with. He was in the store constantly as soon as he was old enough to be useful, and by the time he was 5 he could tell you where most things were without looking and had strong opinions about the arrangement of the candy jars. Nora and Vance had a second child in 1887, a girl, and they named her Margaret, because it was a solid and serious name. And Margaret seemed, from her first days, like a solid and serious person, with dark eyes that watched everything and a calm that suggested great depth below the surface. The night Margaret was born, the December sky was full of stars again the way it had been on their wedding day, and Vance stood at the window while Nora rested and held Margaret against his chest the way he had held Thomas. And the feeling was the same and also completely different, because the second time you stand in a moment like this, you know what it is. He knew what it was. He turned from the window and looked at Nora on the bed, awake and watching him with those storm-gray eyes in the lamplight, and he said, "She is extraordinary." And Nora said, "They both are," meaning their children, and also, he thought, meaning more than that. He sat on the edge of the bed beside her, and she leaned her head against his shoulder with Margaret between them. And outside, the Nevada desert was vast and still and full of stars, and the store below them smelled like coffee and leather and dry goods, and there was nowhere on any road in any direction that was any version of better than this. In 1888, a man passed through Caldera on his way north, a cattle drover from Texas, young, perhaps 22, with a horse that needed a day's rest and a manner that reminded Vance of himself at that age. He came into the store for supplies, and Nora helped him find what he needed and told him who was hiring in the next county, and gave him the information with the same matter-of-fact efficiency she had given Vance 7 years earlier. The young drover thanked her and went out, and a minute later he came back in and said, "Excuse me, madam, I just wanted to say, you run a good store. You can tell a lot about a town from its store, and this is a good town." Nora looked at him with a slight smile. "Thank you," she said. "I think so too." He left. She went back to her accounts. Vance had been watching this from near the back shelf, where he was helping Clara reorganize the preserved goods inventory. And when the young drover was gone, he looked at Nora, and she looked at him, and something passed between them that was not spoken and did not need to be. That evening, when the store was closed and Elsa had taken the children for the night, as she sometimes did on Fridays, and the apartment above the store was quiet, and the lamp was burning low between them at the kitchen table, where they sometimes sat after dinner just talking because they had never stopped having things to say to each other. Nora put her chin in her hand and looked at him across the table. "Do you remember what you said to me?" she asked. "In the barn, that night." "I remember everything about that night," he said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at him with those eyes that he had been reading for 7 years and could still not fully predict. "I was so frightened," she said. "Not of you, of how much I already felt. I was so certain that it was a trap of some kind, that something that felt that significant would cost me something I could not afford to lose." "Did it?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "It gave me things I did not know I was missing." She reached across the table and touched his hand, the same way she had touched it on the morning she told him about Thomas. "You gave me things I did not know I was missing." He turned his hand over and held hers. "You were not a prize," he said. "You were never a prize." "I know," she said. "You made sure of that." "You are the reason I stopped drifting," he said. And it was the same thing he had said in the barn on that firelit night, except now it was not a declaration facing uncertainty. It was a fact embedded in 7 years of living that had proven it true every single day. She squeezed his hand. "Thomas wants a dog," she said after a moment. He let out a breath that was close to a laugh. "I know, he has mentioned it. What do you think?" "I think a dog would be chaos for at least 3 months and then completely settled in and part of everything," he said. "Which seems like us," she smiled. The full smile, the one that changed her whole face, the one that was still the best sight in any direction. "Chaos and then settled in," she said. "I will take that." "So will I," he said. The lamp burned between them. Outside, Caldera was quiet in the Nevada night, the desert cool and enormous and full of the particular kind of peace that comes from being exactly where you are supposed to be. In the spring of 1889, they adopted a dog. He was a large and undignified brown dog of no particular breed who had been abandoned near the stage road south of town and found by the Morales family, who already had 3 dogs and could not take another, and who brought him to Nora because Nora knew what to do with problems. Margaret, at not quite 2, patted General with the same calm thoroughness she brought to everything, and General sat under this with great dignity. The store continued to grow. Nora added a small section of books and periodicals in 1889, which was her own idea, and which brought a different kind of customer into Zealand dry goods, and which gave the store a quality it had not had before, the quality of being a place where people came not only for what they needed, but for something that fed a different kind of hunger. Vance watched her run it with the same pride he had felt from the beginning, and the added depth that comes from watching someone you love be entirely themselves, year after year, without erosion or apology. He was 37 in 1889, and he had the lean, capable look of a man who had worked outdoors most of his life, and the settled quality in his eyes of a man who had found his fixed point and built from it. He sometimes thought about the road into Caldera, the cracked red dirt, the pressing sky, the certainty of just passing through. He thought about it the way you think about a road that brought you somewhere important, with gratitude for where it led and no desire to be back on it. The man he had been on that road, moving because stopping seemed like evidence of failure, would not have recognized the man he was now. Not because the essential nature had changed, but because it had found its right expression, the way a river finds the shape of its bed and moves within it and is completely itself. He was home. She heard him and turned. "Come look," she said. He came to stand beside her at the window. Outside, The main street of Caldera was waking up in the particular way of small towns. The early movement of men going to work and horses being brought out, and the smell of the morning, coffee and wood smoke, and the dry, sweet smell of the Nevada earth. "What am I looking at?" he asked. She leaned her shoulder into his. "All of it," she said simply. He looked at all of it. The street he knew, the people he knew, the town that had taken him in without ceremony and made him one of its own simply because he stayed and worked and meant it. "Good," he said. "Yes," she agreed. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him the way she had learned to lean into him over 7 years. Not with dependency, but with the ease of someone who has chosen their anchor and is glad of it. General appeared from somewhere and sat on both their feet with his full weight, looking out the window with them with the deep satisfaction of a dog who has no complaints about anything. From upstairs, Thomas's voice, bright and awake and already talking, reached them through the ceiling. "He is awake," Nora said. "He is always awake," Vance said. She was already turning toward the stairs, and he caught her hand just for a moment, and she turned back. "I love you," he said. He said it the way he said everything that was true and important, directly and without ornament. She looked at him in the morning light of the store that bore her name, in the town that was both of theirs, with 7 years of a good life between them and more ahead. And she said, "I love you, Vance," with the same plain and complete conviction she had always brought to everything she believed. And then she went to get their son, and he went to start the morning, and the store opened at 8 o'clock as it did every day, and the bell above the door rang as the first customer came in, and the Nevada morning came fully into the room and lit everything in it, and Caldera continued, and they continued inside it, and everything was exactly as it should be.